We're live.
Morning, folks. This is House Corrections and Institutions Committee. It is Wednesday, February 25th. It's our morning meeting. We are working on House Bill 550, which pertains to healthcare for folks who are working. I don't even know how to phrase it, for gender equity. I'm just going to put it that way. So it's really important to have the bill in front of you, and DOC has some recommended language changes that would be a good way for us to start focusing on the bill itself. So many members could have 550 in front of them, as well as the document that DOC has with comments and recommended language changes that was handed out to us last week. New folks were here and we didn't have time to get to.
And for us digital people, is that the first one under Josh Rutherford?
It's called
DOC.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Josh and Haley, if you could identify yourself for the record.
Good morning. My name is Haley Summer, Director of Communications for DOC.
And Josh Rutherford, Facilities Division Deputy Director.
Well, thank you all for having us back. Very excited to be here.
You never left, really.
So we're going to talk through the bill. We have a few comments on some of the language. There are two documents that we're kind of looking at. One is the bill itself and one is the document that DOC presented. If it would be helpful, I can put it up on the screen unless folks feel comfortable with what they have in front of them. So I'm going to pull the committee on that.
Yeah. And I would say we didn't, in many cases, actually recommend alternative language as much as identify some language is hard on this sort of stuff and some concerns around the language that's in there, but I don't know that I have the right language or the language I would suggest to fix it. And at least in one case, it's more a question of what the committee's intent is with the language and how that would be interpreted by courts afterwards if needed.
That's why we work with our lawyer.
Yep. Which I am not, so.
Right. Okay, so we're gonna skip right to page 3. No issues with any of the intent language that the committee has put forth.
For the intent language, I'm thinking we work on that at the end, but the intent language does not go into statute. It's not going into the green books. It's just a statement of legislative intent.
So I think the first piece that we identified is lines 3 through 6. B, two issues with that. The easier one maybe is the according to gender designation of the correctional facility where the inmate is housed, in that we have females lodged at our male facilities, except for Northwest, sort of routinely. So even though we have a male facility, we almost always have cisgender females there as well. So if you say we're going to do searches based on it being a male facility, we do have some females there.
And I think just to add a little bit more context to that, the circumstances in which it would happen largely pertain to just very short periods of time. So if a woman is arrested and charged in Rutland and she has a hearing the next day that's in Rutland, we're not going to bring her to Burlington for 24 hours and then move her back.
So the way that the language is drafted,
And I'm sorry, I'm looking at lines 7 through 9. I jumped. C.
yeah, well, I'm looking at B.
Yeah. Yeah, well, yeah, C is, we can back up.
I would back up. Let's start with lines 3 through 5. This is talking about an inmate being lawfully searched.
Mhm.
And it's according to DOC search policies,
Mhm.
which is in your directives.
Yes.
And then it's according to how the inmate identifies themselves. Or according to the gender designation of the facility where the person is being housed, based on the inmate's search preference.
So I would read that as saying when somebody comes in and we ask their gender identity, if they say transgender female, then we would be obligated to search them with female staff. And currently what we do is we make a independent determination on that. We look at the specifics of the circumstance, whether or not that's safe for our staff and appropriate. And sometimes we honor those requests and sometimes we don't. And I think there's good reasons to do that in some circumstances and good reasons not to do it in some circumstances, specifically around the safety for our staff.
Okay, Troy and then Brian.
Are you obligated by your rules at all to articulate why you deny that request, if you deny that request?
Is that in the new policy?
It is.
It is.
Any accommodation that someone requests, we would, the denial or would be indicated as to why.
We do currently indicate on the form that it's denied. I don't think we necessarily currently indicate why. I think that's in the new policy that we would, but I don't think it's in the current policy.
We've heard in previous testimony, and I assume we're going to get into more, hopefully today, sort of how you can classify a person and what that process looks like. Is there a reason, do we need to be separating whatever the initial screening / search looks like from best practices and what happens sort of after the initial contact or day one?
So that is what we've written into our new policy, is the shift supervisor is going to make a judgment when the person comes in, based on the facts that are presented to them, including asking the person, but just with what's available to them. And then when our committee meets after the multidisciplinary committee meets locally, and then essentially we'll make a more permanent decision. But at 2:00 in the morning, none of those folks are available or deep dived into that individual. So the supervisor has to make an immediate decision based on the facts that are ahead of them, and keeping in mind that often when folks come to jail, they're not very charitable with us. And so by the next morning, we've had that opportunity to look into the facts a little bit more, to talk to the person after they've maybe calmed down, to look at their history a little more. And then we make a sort of an ongoing determination how we're going to deal with this person going forward. But yeah, there's two different decision points and they involve both different parties and I think a different amount of information.
And for that first one, there's some sort of checklist or guide or totality of evidence or, that there's.
We left it fairly open to they have to ask the person's identity. They have to ask what the person wants. And then we left it kind of open to the supervisor to make that determination based on what they have, which is really widely variable. And second and third shift, well, we only have a second shift now, but overnight, that lieutenant is the person who's there. They're the person who has to make that decision. That decision has to be made now. When the person's being entered. So gave them some leeway on that on purpose so they can exercise their best discretion, knowing that our final determination may be different. But especially when we don't have a history with a person and we don't know how safe they're going to be.
And then I guess, last one, and I'll shut up at least for a while, is for that initial screening, could it be determined just by resources available at the time?
No.
Are you referring to staff members who are on shift?
I think the best way to answer that is that it would be resources contingent on safety. So not as simple as, Josh is requesting a female, we don't have one, so the answer is no. I think the reality is we would then have to figure out what is the safest way we can search this person and meet the request. So for example, it might be that we don't conduct a pat search immediately, but we do a body scan. Or it might be that we put the person in an observation cell until we can get a person that's there. But if the concern is that the person is in a state where an observation cell might be triggering, then at that point, that supervisor, which is why supervisors have a really hard job, has to figure out which one of those things is going to be better for we're not talking about two positive choices necessarily. And so they're going to make that best decision based off of those circumstances.
And we have that same challenge with cisgender females. If you have a cisgender female come in at 10:00 at night and there's no female staff on duty, we're not going to say, oh, Josh, go search her. That's not okay. But we're going to have to figure out how do we assure this person's safety until we have a female officer available to do that search. So I don't want to be in a position where we're saying no because we don't have female staff on. That's not an acceptable response, but what are we going to do to keep that person and the institution safe until we can do a proper search?
Yeah, you answered the question I meant to ask.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
So the language in B, the lines 3 through 6, really does encapsulate intake.
Does or does not?
Does. It encapsulates when someone comes in, we are either going to search them based off of the designation of the facility itself and that presentation when they come in, or how they are identified. I think after that is where we have a much more inclusive and robust process. And so it's not limited to that. After that, it's a plan that we come up with that is not simply reduced to what you've asked for or where you are. And I think that's what we're sort of trying to say in that particular section is when we wrote our searches policy, we opened with a statement acknowledging we're a binary system. Corrections is. It just is. And so when you come in, we are going to operate from a binary lens. And then when we get new information that tells us we should do something differently, then we're going to do it differently, just like we do with folks who have mental illness, just like we do with folks who have physical disabilities, language barriers. We're going to do that. And so I think this language is specific to intake. We want to make sure that there's language that says we're going to do the best practice we do after that, which is more robust than just those two things.
And I do have concerns about boxing us in by
Yeah.
law to you get what you ask for, because that's not always going to be appropriate and safe.
I don't disagree that corrections in a broad sense is a binary, is structured right now as a binary, but it's primarily facilities based,
Yeah,
meaning your facilities are binary.
Mhm.
I'm curious if anything within your stated protocols acknowledge that your philosophical approach is not, attempts to not be binary.
yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
very specifically what we
Yeah.
say is like operating within this. We're still going to try and meet individuals' needs as much as we can, recognizing that there are some inherent sort of binary pieces to the way institutions operate. But that we're going to try and meet those needs. I wish I had the exact language.
Yeah, I would love to see that.
I
That's
think-
something-
We can get it. We can get it for
really
you.
said it's like a binary housing system because we have male facilities and female facilities. And so I think I think housing is in there that we were specific to, like we have these designated facilities and you can only go there. But then the reality is that all depends if the sheriffs actually get it right. And I don't mean
Mhm.
sheriffs get it wrong. I mean, a person can present one way and then their sex status can be something different. And we might not know that. And so we may have a transgender male show up at Chittenden because the sheriffs have a female name and they bring the person to Chittenden and then a strip search is done and, oh, okay, well, now what are we gonna do? So that's the reality is that we don't always know. We think we know, but we don't know.
So here's the current draft language that we have, and Haley can, I'm sure, send this,
So wait a minute. Draft language to what?
our policy.
Your policy. So let's take a step back. Okay? Just trying to work through this as it works through in DOC's world. The statute that we're amending is classifications of persons. Okay? Does that happen at booking? Because what we're talking about here, what we're focused on is the search policy for folks at booking.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Is that in your classification statute?
So there's two classification starts when you come in the door.
Okay.
Because we're immediately making some decisions about people when they come in the door based on, are they being charged with felony or misdemeanor? Are they pre-arraigned? Are they post-arraigned? So and then our 5-day classification, within the first 5 days that you're incarcerated, then we do the rest of our sort of formal classification process.
So, okay, I'm just looking at the structure
Mhm.
of the bill. So in section 2, the section we're dealing with is classification of persons. And that is pertaining to, within the 5 days of sentencing or commitment, the person is classified. And then determined where the person will be held.
Mhm.
Then it goes on to new language when classifying or assigning an inmate to a correctional facility, the commissioner would ensure that the inmate is addressed in a manner consistent with the inmate's gender identity. So this is after booking or at booking. And then we go into B, where it talks about the search. So I'm wondering if the structure, the language and where it's placed needs to be clarified. Because right now, what we're talking about is the search that occurs at booking. There could be a search that occurs later on.
Right.
Maybe you're trying to detect if the person has some contraband on them or whatever. So I just want to be clear that right now, what we're talking about is when a person's in booking and they've come in and it's the supervisor. Now, does that supervisor actually go into the booking area and talk
Yes.
to the person?
Yes.
Make that determination.
Yes.
So this is a booking, and
Right.
I'm not sure the language is really clear that we're talking about booking.
I don't think it is, because it says the 5-day. Now, mind you, the inmate is addressed in a manner consistent with their identity. That we do.
That's
Moment-
the
But I mean, from the moment you walk in the door, never mind at 5-day, but you're right, B sort of falls under that 5-day. So it would seem to read that it means within our 5-day classification, not immediately upon intake.
If the
So what you're
committee,
talking about right now, our conversation that we are having pertains to booking.
Yep.
So I would flag that, members of the committee, on whatever draft you're using, that we need to flag that, talk with our ledge counsel, if this language needs to be a different section or addressed differently.
And I'm wondering if because we added the language about the shift supervisor. And the main reason, being able to make a determination that's different than either the person's sex or immediate information, because we immediately thought of, if Haley was with us previously and we did X, Y, and Z, and she's come back, why wouldn't we do X, Y, and Z again if we could? But we
Nothing
also
changed.
can't assume that Haley's still asking for X, Y, and Z. And so, but we also didn't want to put supervisors in a position where we are pretending that they are gender identity experts or that they, know all things. So I wonder if we could send, the language that we added specific to how we do our decision-making at intake to account for what the person is asking, previous knowledge, if that.
That's in your direct.
And
Yeah.
to your point, Chair, that there are kind of two different decisions. There's that immediate, and then there's the slightly more studied decision where we get everybody involved. And we very intentionally treated those as separate. And I think that's appropriate. And we do the same thing with sort of other classification decisions for folks. We have to make an immediate judgment. And then, the next day or by 5-day classification, you make a more informed judgment.
if that would be helpful, we can send the language to Hillary. I can't speak to the section that this language is in regarding statute, but DOC will have no concerns with language being added that clarifies that it's upon intake.
Yeah, I mean, for lines 3 and 6, lines 3 through 6. Does that work the way it's currently drafted for folks in booking?
Yes.
No.
Yes and no.
It says or, so
Yeah. I think as it's written, it provides DOC with the,
you're saying no because it's strictly they said it, so we do it. Well, except the truth is, this is where the catch-all comes in. If we said no because of security issues, then we would be compliant with part 2 because they would be searched according to the facility they're at.
B is,
That's just confusing.
I understand
Well,
what you're saying.
if I come in and I say that I'm transgender, I'm lodged at Springfield, I say I'm transgender female, and the department decides that it's not appropriate to have a female strip search me, even though that's what I asked for. Does that language allow the department to make that determination that's not appropriate or safe?
I think B does, but C does not.
Correct.
B does not, because this is where folks.
Or is doing a big look there, though.
Right?
I mean, this is where folks, you really have to read the language, and we do not have Hillary here. So I'm asking for committee members to really look at this language in the bill and give me your interpretation.
What did Troy say?
The or in section B, 3 through 6 is a big lift with regard to the question that we were just asked.
I think that I'd be comfortable trying to explain.
But I think it reinforces binary. Because what we're saying then in a bill is, this is a male facility, this is a female facility, so either we will search you by your preference or your identification, or we'll search you by these binary. Sounds like you guys don't
Right.
want to keep working a binary.
But where, if you read this, it may be searched according to your directive for the inmate's gender identity, one path, or according to the gender identity or gender designation of that correctional facility where the person is being booked. Based on the inmate search preference. So which one is the controlling? Is it
Right.
the inmate search preference? Or is it your directives? Or is it the facility?
I don't
That's
know.
my question.
That would also be my question, I guess.
So I'm gonna go to Sean, because he just raised his hand, and then Troy.
I'm just looking at that first sentence and I'm not understanding after the comma of searched, it says the inmate be it's will, may, could, probably. What's the word after the inmate?
The inmate be searched?
The inmate something be searched. You can't, that doesn't sound like a proper sentence.
Previous page, right?
No, I think just the word will might need to be there.
Well,
That
this,
goes back to
but
1920.
yeah, I get what you're saying, Sean, and that's a question when we start putting in a new draft.
Yeah.
Okay,
How that's worded.
that's it.
Yeah, Troy?
I think there's room for clarity here that might be accomplished if we also in this section B, lines 3 through 6, accommodate the delay that might be needed for any search when, as DOC has articulated, might be a holding cell, might be a body scan, right? If we accommodate the need to clarify that here, that might help us clean up the questions that are in front of us right now. Right, it gives us I don't want to call it an out, but that's the only thing that, right, if there's a discrepancy between preference, binary institution at which they're housed, and that creates a hesitation on the search process, we can articulate that
Yeah,
things can be paused.
in the case of conflict between,
Yeah, right.
Is this one of those times where it would be easier to say the not? So meaning that it say an individual will not be searched simply based off of the gender designation of the facility or their genital status. And then inserting language that says what it is that we're going to do. I don't know what you're.
Okay, so this is where I suggest, because we got a long ways to go in the bill, and I don't want to spend all morning on this particular piece. So I'm going to recommend that our legal staff watch this YouTube. And it's been flagged that there's two different times that a search can occur. The first time is at booking. So we need language around that piece. And then the next part for a search is the person is incarcerated. It could happen during their sentence. It could happen as a.
Absolutely.
And then we need to structure language around that. So I would leave it at that level at this point. And in terms of the actual structure of the language, I would really encourage having conversations with Hillary and really figuring out the language for that. Because that makes sense, because we're just going to spin our wheels here.
yeah,
So for the committee, please flag this. And then let's go on to your next concern, which is still on page 3, lines 7 through 9.
And this was what we had touched upon when Josh first started speaking, relating to concerns around searching someone based on the gender designation of the facility and that alone.
And I think that's related to the same language problem. I don't know that that's a dramatically
Yeah.
different issue.
And that's the same at booking as it would be if the
Mm.
person was a detainee or sentenced?
Not necessarily, because in the insurance, a female lodge at Southern State isn't going to stay there. But the sort of gender designation of that facility is male. But we do house females there for the short term. So I think it's maybe semantic, but, we certainly search females there according to them being female, even though it is primarily a male facility.
So C really pertains more to booking
Yes.
Mhm.
and not for when a person is a detainee or sentenced.
No, because after arraignment or whatever, they'll be transferred to Chittenden, over the appropriate place.
Okay,
The other clarification is, we say gender identity, and my question is, do you actually mean gender identity, or do you mean gender identity and sex? Because they're not the same. So sex is the genital status, and so are you asking that? Because we would, within reason, we would always know someone's gender identity based off of what they said, what we had in paperwork, or what we're seeing. So we wouldn't necessarily know someone's sex. And so I think that this section needs to be clear about which one or both, like, do you mean both? Do you mean just one?
and that
Because
would be true for both B and C. To clarify, I mean, is it to
Yeah.
clarify that throughout the whole statute?
Yes,
I think the intention, and Representative Hedges, this is your bill originally, right? Is that we look at gender identity, not just biological sex.
Right, and I don't know if determined is the right word there. Maybe it's a different word other than determined.
So the-
Especially since you have folks who are non-binary, so they don't
Right,
fall into either box.
so I'm just looking at WellPath here, because I do have a definition of gender identity. A person's internal sense of their own gender.
Mhm.
So when we don't have a definition of gender identity in our state statutes, do we?
I'm not sure.
I don't know. We have one we use, but I don't know
Yes.
that, which I think we relied in part on WPATHs.
we did.
Put
'Cause
together,
in our
yeah.
policy, the three terms that we are using are intersex, transgender, and gender diverse. Because we know there's changing language that happens with non-binary, gender non-conforming, and so gender diverse was a term we were using, which came from medical document, a National Medical Board, if I recall, because it seemed to be a great term to encapsulate words being used now and whatever words get added in the future. So we did keep transgender as a different term, but gender diverse was for anything else.
We've got a definition.
Yeah, are you one VSA?
We do have a
144.
definition.
The term gender identity means an individual's actual or perceived gender identity or gender-related characteristics intrinsically related to an individual's gender or gender identity, regardless of the individual's assigned sex at birth.
550 doesn't reference that though. That might need to be added.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's
Well-
multiple definitions instead.
Right, I mean, this is again, drafting.
Yeah.
That we could say wherever the term gender identity is used pertains to what we currently have in definition and statute.
That would be helpful.
Well, this just goes back to your question or point about line 7 about determining. Would it be resolved by saying if the question of an inmate's gender identity cannot be resolved? Does that fix the, yeah, okay.
So what's that, is it in one VSA?
VSA 144.
Well, if that definition says told or perceived, then we will always know, because our staff will be trained to perceive. Or ask.
Yep, it's actual or perceived, so.
Yeah.
So we would then always know something, but then again, that's where the intake process is different than potentially the long-term process, because we would operate off of perception in the beginning, but then when we got new information, we would then operate off of actual potential.
So the definition of gender identity is fluid.
Oh, that's what he just read. It said actual or perceived, so that would then mean we would always have an answer.
Okay, that's what I want to make sure. It doesn't lock you in In one situation of booking versus another situation for sentenced or detainee.
Correct. And that's actually that aligns with what we do.
Yeah, yeah. We're just taking some work to get there. So moving on to lines 10 through 12, and I do see sort of the caveat included in lines 19 through 21.
Before we go there,
Okay.
I want to go back to your comment, DOC's comment on lines 7 and 9, where it conflicts with current PREA guidance. Is that true?
So PREA does require that we make an informed decision, and that it's not just as linear as someone has these genitals and you will do this. And so our search policy is sort of based off of, and practice is based off of that, that it's not so prescriptive. And I will add that in PREA, it does say that you cannot search someone for the purpose of determining their genital status. And that, I don't know if we didn't put that in our notes, but that may be something.
It is in our policy. It has
Yes,
been in
that
our
is in our
policy for
policy
quite a
for
while.
quite a long time. And so I don't know if that's language you would want to add in here as well. Because we support that
Yes.
in all the ways. And that includes medical. We will consult with medical and have a conversation with the person, but it is not to have the person remove their clothing and see what's there, that they'll have a conversation with them to make.
So C is both for someone who, I'm just trying to think this through. So C is both for someone who's being booked, but it also can apply to a sentenced or detained person. Or is it just a booking?
If we're going to define gender identity the way that it is in statute, that Representative Casey said, I don't know if C is necessary because I don't know we'd ever have a certain situation where somebody's gender identity couldn't be either actual or perceived.
You're talking about searching.
Right,
B and C talks about the search process.
right. But C is only a caveat if gender identity cannot be determined.
In the definition that was read in statute, it would always be able to be determined.
But that
There might still be a conflict between
PREA,
the perception and the stated.
we need to really clarify that.
Which if you tweak B, would address that.
But B is only for booking.
Not,
We were saying to add like, B1 intake, B2. not
Right, if we
intake.
split it up,
If you did that and put the language we were just talking about in there and use the definition in statute currently, then you would not need C.
it would make it less confusing.
so this is where we really need Hillary to figure all of this out. But the language you're referring to, Jen, is the one in PREA that should be included as well.
If you guys think it's a good idea, we do.
Oh,
It's in
the
our
do not
policy, the
search, we do not search,
that you
just
will not
to,
search
just
someone's
figure out what somebody has for
identity.
genitals.
Correct.
And,
Yeah.
and that's been our policy for a long time, certainly support that being.
And to
in
me, that
statute.
is something that would be absolutely appropriate to be in a bill, because
Right.
that's a big deal.
It's a big deal. Okay. Okay. Are people clear on that?
Yep.
On this one? What I may do is, this is a heavy lift to remember all these moving pieces. I think what we need to do is have a few members of our committee sit down in person with Hillary to highlight some of the parts of the bill that we really need to focus, and ask Hillary to really pay attention to our discussion on YouTube. Does that make sense to folks?
It's also cool.
Right, but she's a lot of this. This is really important piece, because I want to keep moving too. How long can Hillary be here? She comes in for the rest of the time.
10:30.
Okay. Anything else on B and C before we move on to D? Okay, let's go to D.
I think well, it's more E, but I think D, as long as that language in 19 through 21 is okay. Because it does allow us to make a decision contrary to what the person asks, as long as we can articulate the reason for that. And I think there's it's been discussed in testimony why what somebody asks isn't automatically what's appropriate. And we just need to, we would strongly ask to preserve that discretion for the safety of the folks in our custody.
So I'm having a hard time following what you just said.
So somebody asked to be housed in a female facility based on their preference. And we determined that is not safe or appropriate, and we're going to continue to house them in a male facility. Sometimes you're going to ask to be housed in a female facility, and we'll say, yes, that's appropriate. We're going to do that. We have some transgender women living there now, and there's some other circumstances where we're going to say that's not appropriate. That's not safe for the women who are there. And we don't support that. And the language in 19 through 21 does allow us to do that as long as we give a reason for that.
But,
No, because this is specifically.
yeah, but what you're talking about here in D is residential treatment programs. Within,
It says housed at a correctional facility.
right, but if eligible, because it's really talking more about the residential treatment program.
The way that I read this language is that it's talking about the choice of which facility to house an individual on.
That would also be how I read it, Chair.
It does include information about residential treatment, but the department didn't take that language into too much consideration as we were really focusing on the placement in a correctional facility.
We're talking about the first part of the comma, because if you read that as an alone sentence,
Yeah.
it's they're housed
Right,
based on the inmate's preference.
right.
So that's what we're saying is concerning, because especially when we have people who make requests who are making them for nefarious purposes and not because they're transgender, and that's what we're trying to.
Right, that's what you're trying to,
Because very rarely do we not approve things for folks who are transgender, gender diverse. Others.
You all are saying, right? The 19 through 21 covers the instance where 10 through 12 cannot be honored.
I think so. I think so. I just want to, but yes, I believe that does.
Yeah.
And we haven't gotten into this yet. I just want to bring it into conversation. Those decisions that are contradictory to the stated preference or the stated wishes, we're going to want to make certain that those decisions are made by probably a panel of people, including medical, who, and we haven't gotten to this part of the bill yet, are bound by statute that requires them to be culturally competent around transgender issues. So, I mean, we're talking about intake right now, which is a very immediate sort of decision-making process. But at some point, the permanent housing is going to be discussed. And we're going to want to make sure that we have a consistent protocol that includes, trans-specific healthcare, mental and physical healthcare, as these determinations are being made that might ultimately lead to conflict with the initial request. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And that would be, we have the multidisciplinary team locally and then the central one. I think we could always use more capacity in terms of cultural competency in that area.
Yeah.
We've certainly tried to build that over the years. We do have medical and mental health at the table, but I think we can always use more competency in that area. It is sometimes difficult to find.
Right. And
But the intent is very much
statute that we might require you to find it.
I've seen that in there. But yes, the intent, our practice, our policy would be that that's made at that central committee,
Yeah.
Which really should be the department's experts in that area.
And if I recall, our policy requires that the local plan is to us within 3 days of intake.
3 days, yes.
So just to sort of put
Business,
folks at
free
ease,
business.
Did we say three? Oh, yeah, we
We
said
did.
three business.
We said 3
days.
business.
Our calendar
accounting
days.
for-
Not calendar, because a holiday weekend and all of a sudden you're not in compliance with your policy.
And-
Or you're rushing and you're not making good decisions
And
because
so
you're
we're
trying.
getting those documents from facilities. I just didn't want folks to think it's like 2 weeks before it makes it, it's not. And as I said, we meet every Wednesday, so we have those plans already ready and waiting, and that we're having the meeting to discuss them, so.
Although we keep testifying on Wednesday, so
Yeah,
the last 2 weeks in a row,
We don't have anyone to discuss this week, so it's
but that's good.
Thanks.
So my understanding is that D is okay with you folks because 3A covers a
Yes.
denial.
Yes, ma'am.
So there's also more to 3 than A. There is also B at the top of page 4.
Before we get to B, I would love to touch on 2E. Specifically, single cell status. We don't have that. We have very limited single cells. We've been in here a number of times, talked about capacity in the system. The other thing, of course, is that, then you start building in a reason for folks to do something for secondary gain, because a lot of folks would prefer single cells.
And that's in close custody.
So
It's in SEF.
SEG, it's in close custody. We have single cells in our high acuity mental health and infirmary.
It's not in the
It's
living.
not in general population.
It's not in living.
So I don't have it. And I think that'd be really problematic and give folks a reason to try and game a system, which is really what we try to avoid. But single cell status would certainly be covered by folks for, sorry.
But we're just requiring serious consideration. We're not requiring granting that upon request.
It's true, but again, it's not even something that the department is capable of granting.
Wait a minute. You have administrative close custody, administrative SEC.
Yes.
You have that.
I do not want to put somebody in administrative segregation for,
I know, but you do have, and this is new to the committee. Okay, because we worked on this years and years ago. You have administrative seg that is designed for a person's safety. If a person is feeling threatened in the facility, administrative seg could be used
It
for a
could.
few days.
It
It's
could.
not in
Yep.
perpetuity. There is a due process
Mhm.
in that statute dealing with that, but there is administrative seg that deals directly with the safety of the person. And it's not ongoing for a long period of time. So I just want to put that on the table. There is a short mechanism.
There is. I don't know that either the intent or the language of the bill would suggest that or that we would want to be putting folks in any sort of segregation because of their gender identity.
I agree with that.
Okay.
But if a person is being threatened
Yeah.
in a male facility
Yeah.
and they identify as a female, but
And
they're being
we have,
housed in
and that we
a-
have done in short term until we can
They
figure
would
out.
have a right to administrative seg.
Yeah.
So so Priya has some language around that as well, around the use of using segregation just based off of someone's gender identity status, and there's timeframe
Right.
requirements, and so we already have in policy language around that. We also have in policy the use of it when someone is indicating they're not safe. And so I think the issue is, at least for me, when I read this sentence, I believe that we will have cisgender male inmates who will be identifying as transgender to get a single cell.
Right.
And that is what I'd like to avoid. Because
And that's fair.
I also think that, I don't think anyone intended this, but, as we said, we currently don't house our transgender folks all in single cells. Some are, some aren't. And so we know that oftentimes with transgender or gender diverse individuals, there's some perception, some judgment, some confusion. And so what we have actually found is that folks who maybe had some different thoughts and opinions, when they end up living with someone who's different from them, realize, oh, Those things I thought weren't accurate. And then what you actually end up having is a built-in buddy system, protection system for this person who is vulnerable. And if we have them in a single cell, we don't have that. Because we don't have, like, we can tell you that we can protect people, but we can't. We do the best we can, but if you're a single officer in a unit with 70 people, you can't do that. And so sometimes folks' cellmates are the ones that are looking out for them, or they're the ones coming forward and telling us, hey, this person is getting, you know, roughed around, or they're telling them, hey, here are some options of how you can report. And so if we isolate them, the concern is there's then this visual presentation that you're different and you're alone, and you need to be alone because you're unsafe, especially transgender females with males. Because there is when you have a transgender male, the assumption is not a perversion. But when you mention transgender female, automatically there is this assumption that that person is sexually deviant. And so if you put them in a cell by themselves, or you say that's what we should do, it almost reinforces this belief without meaning to, that this person is deviant and has to be alone. I don't think that's what anyone meant, but I do think that the folks could easily perceive it that way.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily advocating for this, but is there ever a situation where the interstate compact would be used for a vulnerable person, like a transgender inmate, who just felt bullied from facility to facility?
So we've certainly used interstate compact. I don't know that we've ever used it in that circumstance, in part because Vermont runs one of the safest systems in the country. And if somebody is getting bullied due to gender identity, I don't know that there's a state I can magically send them to where that doesn't occur. I think where we've used that around safety concerns has been more either when somebody's crime is so egregious and has right up a lot of community sentiment, or when they have a like a law enforcement connection or something in the state, where housing them in our system would be. So I think a number of years ago, we had a probation officer commit a crime and had a year sentence to serve. He'd worked with the department for 15 years. We didn't feel we could house him safely in our system. We used interstate compact there. But I don't know that if we were to have somebody we've never had somebody where it's a gender identity thing, and we feel they'll be better served in another state.
We did explore it when we were talking about moving someone out of a facility. And Colorado, because they have a designated facility and unit, I did speak with their PREA coordinator. However, and we were trying to explore the idea of interstate compact. Where the conversation stopped is that the way that it works in their system is they staff the person and then they make a decision about the best facility for them. And they don't do that if the person's not in their custody. So what we would have had to have done was interstate compact them to Colorado. And then if Colorado decided that's not where they should go, they would have been in a men's facility. We were like, that's not what we want to happen. And we certainly didn't want to ask Colorado to do anything different, but we did explore it. And if it may be something we look at again, if it's even, they have to check their stuff too, but that might be an option. So we did explore it in one case.
But again, you're not going to find many systems where somebody's going to be safer. And I don't think there's any system anywhere in the country where there's not some prejudice and discrimination around this topic. Vermont is more progressive than most, but there's just not a state where you can go, this won't ever be an issue.
Yeah, sure. At any given time, how many people do we have out of state on an interstate compact?
Very few. I think we're down to 6 or 7.
Yeah.
We used to, and I think the chair will remember this, we used to use this more heavily with folks who have long sentences or egregious crimes, and we've really moved away from that. Even for folks who have committed egregious crimes, for the most part, we can house them safely in Vermont, and we can house folks for long term. And by and large, on a state contract aside, we would like Vermonters to be serving their sentences in Vermont.
And I think one of the other drivers would be is obviously if our own staff got in trouble, because, we need to look after our
Law
staff.
enforcement.
Law enforcement, that absolutely, we've used it around that.
It puts them in a really uncomfortable position, and it's just really uncomfortable for everybody. So it's just not, those are cases where we would look at sending.
Or, theoretically, if you would have a female who had offended against staff at Chittenden, for instance, there's no other option. If I have a male who's offended against staff at a male facility, I can move them to another facility. If I have a female who's done that, Chittenden's the only place. So in theory, that could be a situation.
It was in the past also used for maximum security because we don't have maximum security. We have
We have close custody. Yeah, and there are, in theory, some folks who just have a ongoing determination to act in a very, very unsafe manner that might be better served in another system. We tried to reduce our reliance on that, but there's a couple.
I have to remind the security level within a correctional facility is not determined by what they were convicted of. It is not determined by the crime. It is determined by the behavior of the person within the correctional facility. They could have the most egregious crime, the most violent crime, but that doesn't mean that they need the highest security level.
We had a gentleman who tried to escape from Chittenden and then went up to Northwest and tried to escape from Northwest and assaulted a staff member doing so, and 2 escape attempts in a fairly short period of time and a serious assault on staff. And we decided that it would be better for that person to be housed in the Federal Bureau of Prisons. And we made that intergovernmental agreement. It had nothing to do with this crime. And we have folks here in state who have committed very serious crimes and are fine in our system. But sometimes folks,
The public perceives it as if they had the most egregious crime, that's maximum security.
and it's really not. It's really far more about how you do time inside.
That's important for members to keep in the back of your mind whenever we're talking about security law in a facility. So getting back to the language, I do have a question. Are there ever times, like I'm looking at line 17, 18, removing an inmate or individual who pose a threat? Do you ever, if someone is harassing a
Yes.
trans person, and it's pretty continuous, do you relocate the one who's doing the egregious behavior?
Absolutely. Some of that's required under PREA, depending what the behavior is. Sometimes it doesn't reach that level, but we still think it's inappropriate to have them. Or if we see somebody engaging in some sort of grooming behavior. So certainly we recognize that transgender folks can be vulnerable in our system. And so sometimes that's where they're housed, and sometimes it's who's housed in their area. And so we've had cases where we're like, no, this person's engaging in grooming behavior toward this person. We're going to move the person who's engaging in that behavior to preserve their safety. So that happens. That is a practice, yes.
And it was an intentional philosophical shift in the department, I would say, definitely over the last decade. We used to move the victim because they're the easy one to move. It's just that simple. And we really stopped that practice. I think PREA helped drive that a lot. But the truth is, once we gave folks that language, they were like, oh, nobody was against it. So we really have changed that in kind of all the ways that the emphasis, we try to move the perpetrator first. But in some cases, the victim is the one that actually makes more sense to move, or they're asking to be the one to move. So there's that too. So we have that flexibility, but the emphasis is on the perpetrator first.
Yeah.
So for 13 through 18, is the real issue granting single cell status with that section?
I think that's going to be the biggest challenge, because we really struggle to do it outside of those restricted environments. We just don't have single cells in our system. And I recognize your point that it says serious consideration, but if the answer is always no, then it's hard for me to say I've given it serious consideration. But the other factors in here, we do certainly give consideration to.
And the other thing we would hate to have happen is that if we were going to move someone to a facility because we thought that facility was the better place for them, if that facility didn't have a single cell, so then they had to stay where they didn't want to stay because we had to wait for a cell to be available, then it's like we're making, a bad decision because of that particular thing. So we generally wouldn't do that. We'd move them first and then get to where, your desired location.
Troy?
We kept it in there, but put a qualifier in there to the degree that any single cells might be available. Yeah, it doesn't get rid of the fact that they're not.
That they're not. I was going to say that's kind of the challenge. If you're asking us to do something that we just don't have. And to Jen's point, I do worry about singling folks out and in that way as well. But the biggest issue is just that we don't have the single cells.
What if we got rid of the word granting? So the consideration is to the single cell, not because that
Sure.
to me, that says like the emphasis is on you will give it
Right,
versus
right.
you will consider it being given as an option, just like health and safety. If we got rid of the word granting,
I suppose, I just. We
'Cause we
don't have general population single cells.
right, but then we would consider it, we would say we don't have any available and we would move on.
But would that then
I mean, unless
open the
somebody,
door for the inmate to file a grievance?
Can I jump in from a psychiatric perspective? Just,
oh, please,
Could you just identify yourself, please?
yes, yeah, Dr. Allison Richards. I'm currently the director of psychiatry for WellPath, a healthcare contractor. Just from my perspective, coming from academic medicine at UVM into the correctional healthcare system, single cell status is one of the things that has struck me the most, in that how inmates will use that. I guess I don't like to use the word manipulation, but to get their needs met. And so when we don't have access to that, for example, like hunger strikes, people will go to extreme measures for just a single cell. Hunger strikes, extreme self-injury. There's all kinds of reasons someone might want a single cell. And I could also see this potentially being something that people will try to utilize. And if it's in statute, grievances, lawsuits, potentially, I don't know. I just think if it's not something available, which we get caught in the middle often. We are often caught in the middle. You know, patients come to us and say, we were just talking about it this morning and kind of redirecting the staff that we don't recommend single cells. We stay out of it. But it is really, I guess it would say, one of the things that has shocked me the most working in corrections is how people will go at having a single cell and do everything they can to get one. Just sharing that from a mental health psychiatric perspective, it's been quite profound.
And people being cisgender males, because it is cisgender males more than any other population. Because the cisgender females do not fight for them because there's not many and there's only one facility they can be in. So it's predominantly cisgender males that really fight to the teeth for those cells.
Brian?
I don't know if DOC has a specific suggestion to what we're talking about here, to the degree that you do or could. Is it just striking the single cell status portion, or are you essentially saying that E is unnecessary because you're already giving enough weight to the health and safety, or even the perception of health and safety?
I'm okay with E. I think that the language is fine. If I had a magic wand, striking the single cell status piece would probably work really well for me. Whether or not that's the committee's intent or desire, I mean.
Well, is he doing anything? Is he useful or needed?
Well, I think the rest of E matches up with some of our program language, because we do give consideration to their health and safety as part of their plans. That's part of the discussion. That's whether or not it belongs in statute is really your guys' win, not mine. But that is a process that we do that as part of our housing plan, is talking to the person. What do they need to feel safe and healthy in this environment?
So the effect here would just be putting it in statute what is already policy.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I actually think FREA may require that we do that. I know we do it anyway, but I think FREA requires that we give serious consideration to it. So I don't have a problem with that language. It's really just the single cell piece.
Correct.
So how does this play into our out-of-state bed contract? Do we house any? I don't believe do we house any trans folks out of state?
We don't.
I know
We don't currently. We have an ability in process to do it if we felt it was appropriate, but we haven't in place sometime.
Again, expecting Mississippi as a state to abide by the same expectations we do is unfair. And so, I mean, it's just that simple. It has nothing to do with course. I mean, sure, there's some, but you can't take New England philosophy and stick it in the South and expect it to be successful. It's just not going to be. And so if we're going to house people the best way we think it should be, that is absolutely one of the factors we look at first. How successful would this be? Probably not that successful. Okay, then we don't do it. But we have established, since we returned the group of folks, some better relationships and communications with folks at CoreCivic. Like more intentional. I don't mean anyone was against it. We just have put things in practice. So if we were going to do it, There would absolutely be a conversation between myself and their PREA coordinator. We would absolutely involve the out-of-state team, and we would ensure that we had a comprehensive plan before the group.
And it might be based on their request. They have a very long sentence. They want to be there. And then the other thing is by having the ability to do it, we avoid the anybody claiming for secondary gain because you don't send. So therefore, if I say this, you can't send me.
Well, and we also we eliminate the thing of someone who is transgender, who wants to go out of state now feeling like they have to say they're cisgender so they can go out of state. We don't want that. If they choose to do that, that's fine, but we don't want to create a system where they know there's more for them to do out of state and it's warm. So I mean, they might want to do that and that's okay.
Well, it's warmer and as you all know, we have facilities that are
Conditioned.
also mixed sentence and detained, so a little bit more unstable. And I know some of the guys prefer out of state because everybody down there is doing sentences. And so it's a pretty stable environment. You know, folks who are coming in who are all dysregulated and I know that for some of the guys out of state that is a preference. I like to be around other folks who are doing bids, not the guy who's going home next week.
Consistent.
Consistent, yeah.
Okay, so let's move on.
Okay, the next comment that we have is actually not addressed in the document. It's something that Josh flagged the other day.
Yes.
So it's on page 4,
C.
so lines 10 and 11.
So before you go there, I just want to bring it back to when you're housing a person and denying that housing preference. It covers D on page 3, but there's also a B on number 3 at the top of page 4, that if an inmate raises concerns about their health or safety, the inmate's housing and placement shall be reassessed. That still plays in with taking care of the issue in D.
Yeah, we don't have any objection to that. That's part of current practice. If somebody expresses concerns, we look at it again.
And the only thing, if you wanted to add it, is just like PREA requires, our policy says it, that at any point in time, if someone is requesting any new accommodations, then they initiate the process and we reassess them at any point in time. So they don't have to have a concern about their health or safety. If they are now saying, yeah, I didn't ask for this before, but I would like to ask for this now, they can't at any point in time.
And sometimes that's just an evolution in their process and their gender identity. But there is absolutely, I don't have any objection to B.
So you could just add request in that sentence if you wanted to, like if the inmate requests, raises a concern, or what, like if you wanted to do that.
So I'm gonna go back to the bottom of page 3. Lines 19. Any denial of an inmate's search for housing preference pursuant to subdivision 2. Little way. See a little way.
Does it mean big A? That would make sense.
Yeah, no, it's little a. It's talking about, no.
Wait, where are you reading it?
19 and 20.
Wondering if it refers to line 10, Chair, on page 2.
Yeah, that's what I was just gonna suggest.
No, it's not. No, of
Yeah.
this subdivision 2, of this subsection A. Subdivision 2, okay, that's when you're classifying or assigning an inmate to a facility. And that's when you're doing the search at booking, okay. Is that denial of the inmate search or housing preference, can the inmate grieve this?
Yes.
Yes.
Way back, did you find a little way?
Yeah.
I think any discretionary decision of the department is grievable. It's kind of the point of the grievance process.
Have you seen grievances being filed in any
One?
of these cases?
We have one now. We have one. But any discretionary decision the department makes gets grieved at some point by somebody. Program entry, program removal, work camp placement, sentence computation. I mean, people grieve a number of decisions we make, and that's kind of why we have the grievance process there. So there can be a more in-depth look, and we make sure all the way up to the commissioner that the department's answer is something that we were willing to support.
I don't think, I'm having trouble finding, I mean, we know there were some suits filed,
On housing plans?
well, because the person wasn't transgender.
Right, right,
So
right.
they said
But in
no.
terms of grievances, the
But
one.
yeah, I can only think of one. I cannot think of,
But certainly it would be an issue that because it's a decision by the department, a discretionary decision, I would certainly think they would be eligible to grieve it. And then it would ultimately go up through the process and the
Yeah.
commissioner to support or not support the department's decision.
So I asked that question purposely so that members can be
Figured.
aware that there is a grievance process within our DOC structure.
and in that same case where we now have a grievance, the person also communicated with prisoners' rights, who came to us. And we explained the decision-making is, so there's prisoners' rights is also an option that a resource folks can use. And then, we can have an open communication with them around like a little, sometimes a little more expanded, because there's certain things we may not want to disclose to the individual, especially specific safety issues. But we would be able to disclose that potentially to prisoners' rights, who can then work with the individual.
Just wanted to put that on the table.
We certainly, I mean, I'd say, I don't think it's a surprise to anybody. Not every decision we make in corrections is popular with everyone who's incarcerated.
Yeah.
It's
The
true.
only other grievance I can think of is there was an individual at Northern who requested a female specific job. Those don't exist, just
Oh, yeah.
folks didn't know. And so I think this was years ago, and I think they grieved it, and it was, I mean, obviously denied at the low level, because there are no gendered jobs.
Mhm.
So you can't request a specific, you can't say you're transgender to get a specific job.
Okay. Next.
I don't. Why we said no.
4C lines 10 and 11. We were trying to figure out what this language means, and how to interpret it, and came up with a couple of different ways to read it. I think the one that would be most concerning to me, is we do have some cisgender. If a transgender male has a history of physical or sexual violence against women, that does not automatically mean we will not consider putting them in gender. On the other hand, it is certainly something that we want to look at. If somebody has that history of physical or sexual violence against women, we have the safety of our women, our cisgender women in Chittenden to think of as well. So would C mean that because some cisgender women have a history of physical or sexual violence against other women, mean that we couldn't look at that factor or cite that factor in a transgender woman as a reason why we don't think it's appropriate?
Lay that out again.
Okay, so I have a transgender male.
Transgender woman?
Yes, I'm sorry, yes,
Yeah,
transgender woman who is incarcerated for sexual assault against a woman.
Right.
That is not an automatic no, but it's certainly something we
Sure.
want to consider. Because we also have some cisgender women who have sexual violence against women, it is therefore a factor present among inmates at the preferred facility. So would that mean I cannot consider or cite that as a reason why not to put that person there? It's infrequent among cisgender women, but we do certainly have some who have sexual and physical violence against women.
And because I don't want to stick only to conversations about transgender females, because it's the real easy one for everyone to talk about, it's a popular one in the news. The opposite of that, or the other consideration, is the inherent belief that men's facilities are more violent and men are more violent and men are predatory and discriminatory. We wouldn't place a transgender male at that facility because they're at a greater risk of being assaulted. So just by nature of the fact that men are violent, like that's not good enough as a reason. So I just want to make sure that when we're thinking about this, we are not just thinking about transgender females and we're considering transgender males as well.
I just can't, I'm just curious, struggling with what C means
Yeah.
and how that would play out in practice.
So this is what I'm thinking in terms of going forward here, because there's a lot of moving pieces, language changes. So to help Hillary and to help us, what I would really recommend, I want to continue with testimony. But what I would really recommend is to have a few people from the committee here, along with a few people from DOC to work directly with Hillary on proposed language changes. And that would be a tremendous help. But I want to continue with the testimony, but there's flags coming up all over the place, and this is going to be a lot of work to deal with. And speaking of that, I have a question on line 6.
Well,
Page 4.
Yes, okay.
Department shall not deny a search or housing placement based on any discriminatory reason. And I have a question here, who determines and how do you define that? Is the discriminatory reason just A, B, and C? Or it's more than that?
It says
and it
including,
includes A,
so
B,
I don't
and
think it's
C.
just A, B, and C.
Well, it's broader than A, B, and C.
Agreed.
Agreed.
And who, do we have that terminology in DOC and other places?
In ours, it would be considered discriminatory to the transgender or gender diverse population and intersex if we allowed a thing for the cisgender male or female population and we're not considering it for the transgender, gender diverse, or intersex population. And what I mean by that is we provide tampons and maxi pads to cisgender females because we have to and we should. We are not going to automatically provide those to transgender females because they do not need them. So we have to consider all of that. So it's not that we get to say no to searches. It's that just because you've said you're transgender female, we're not going to give you tampons and maxi pads because you don't menstruate. That's a medical device for menstruation. So that's what we're looking at in here is, so that wouldn't be discriminatory. But if we said, well, you have a vulva, so you can't go to Northwest, that's discriminatory. So.
I will, I think to your point though, Chair, I think 6 is pretty wide. And without it being defined, I don't know. And certainly we wouldn't want to make decisions based on, race or religion or things like that, identity statuses, protected identity status, things like that. But it is just sort of pretty wide language.
I think Priya basically put that in wording to say all things done just based on genital status is what Priya sort of encapsulates as this sort of bigoted or discriminatory approach. So, a lot of times in Priya, what you see is you cannot make decisions based solely on genital status. You have to be comprehensive in your planning, and that's sort of the way I read 5 and 6. And at least that's what our policy encapsulates.
Yeah, and certainly, and that totally aligns with 7, 8, and we would certainly have no objection to 9 as well. We shouldn't be making decisions based on, sexual orientation.
Yeah, it's just I totally get why it's in here and we agree. It feels a little
Mushy.
disconnected to other things.
I think that I would flag it. It needs some clarity.
To return to the subject of lines 10 and 11, was the discussion that the intent wasn't understood or that it could be more broadly interpreted or misused?
Both.
Yeah.
Both. I'm not.
I shouldn't assume, but I'm assuming intent is prejudice on the part of other inmates should not determine where the person is placed. I assume, but.
I can't speak to
Right,
that, yeah.
yeah.
Well, intent only goes so far.
Yeah,
When things end up in court, as they sometimes do, the court interprets the language of the bill or the language of the statute. And whatever anybody's intent was, we certainly run into that challenge in the past sometimes when intent isn't clearly reflected.
and so is it like a broader free floating concern about its misuse, or is there a specific example that you should?
Well, I think that example around physical and sexual violence is a very
Yeah.
specific one
Yeah.
that I would have concerns about, although I'm sure there could be others. But that's the one that comes most
Yeah.
sharply to mind.
Well, and then what is a factor? Because if somebody wanted to read this from a discriminatory lens, an answer could be, I have this, you have that, so we can deny this because you don't have that. So you don't align, or vice versa. So like, I think that's where we were concerned. When you say a factor, what does that mean? Is it the violence? Is it genital status? Is it? I don't know.
Well,
I suppose if you were to, I've got a transgender woman who has killed another woman. If I have any female murderers in Chittenden, does that mean I can't look at that factor or cite that factor as a denial? I don't know that that's where, I know this, I don't think that's where I would want to go. It's certainly a factor I'd want to consider.
that's why I want a group of folks from here with you folks with Hillary to work it through. And I already know
I
what.
think we keep putting a lot of heavy lifting on Hillary over it. You missed the whole first half of this,
Yeah,
which was all about Hillary too, so.
I already have 3 people in mind here.
If you had a friend from when you drop, you would work.
As the committee member. So I did it, and I am excited about
Are you though?
It's clear, I truly am, because well-written bills are what makes me happy. So I'm delighted to have a chance to be clearer. He says.
And I will say the language is hard. I mean, we struggled with our policy language. Kathy, Ben and I were all involved with that, with our policy language and intent and meaning and how do you explain it in policy is easier to change than statute. But language in this area is really hard.
Well, and clearly what came out of testimony is knowing that we already have a lot of this stuff in practice is then really helpful, because then when you're making your bill, it's about ensuring that we're following that practice and that the principles are covered, but we're able to do the things we need to do to house people best. I think that, at least it seemed like from the last testimony, that was really helpful, because when you think we're not doing anything, then you have to start from scratch and put it all in. And we are definitely committed to not having you have to do that.
Let's keep moving on. We flagged this one.
The last thing that we wanted to address, and this really is a thing for Ledge Council. I also apologize because I'm realizing now that on the document we provided, it references page 6, but it's actually on page 5. Well, it starts on page 5. So it's with regards to the section that some of the new language about the intake and classification process is outlined in. So it's included in section 28 VSA 801, which pertains to medical care of inmates. And the language that was added pertaining to classification and intake of incarcerated people, which actually is on page 6, is not pertaining to medical care of incarcerated people. So I don't think that that's an appropriate section for that language to be in. It could probably, and deferring to you, Hillary, be placed in the
Under 701B, under
Yeah.
classification, not under 801.
Yeah, I raised a similar concern during the walkthrough. That makes a lot of sense to me. And I think from discussion earlier, rethinking which sections and whether a new section or different section makes sense to outline what's happening at intake, what's happening generally, might be a better way to fix some of the concerns folks have raised.
Yeah.
And putting that in an intake section separate from medical care would make a lot of sense.
And I do think on line 15, again, if you wanted to put in there, because it says each inmate shall be given a physical assessment. I do think if you're going to reference a physical assessment, it would be a not bad idea to be clear that that physical assessment is not to determine genital status.
And that's existing, I mean,
Yes.
that's not proposed, that's existing language in
Correct.
there. We do
Well,
that.
well, right, but this one is specific to medical. And our
Right.
policy
Okay.
is for our whole thing. And I think if you're gonna say that, but again, absolutely, medical should conduct a physical assessment, but not for the purposes of determining genital status. But it should be.
But that is existing law, is that they'll do a
Correct.
physical assessment for folks, and it should be. I would
But
know.
I think this goes back to the comment around cultural competency, but medical should be evaluating the specific physical needs for someone who is transgender or gender diverse, and they have specific medical needs connected to surgery or not surgery or whatever.
That was really the only thing there. I know that last week Dr. Uliger had raised some concerns around the language of cultural competency. I know he's also not here today. I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to add, Dr. Richards, with regards to that language, or if that's a conversation that we have on a later day.
And that there is a definition of it. Instead, it refers to, if you go to page 7, there is a definition
Yeah.
that we're including here. But it's the definition of cultural competencies in 18 BSA
Yes.
51. So we need to see what that definition is, and then how it applies to you.
I think that, I think I should look at that definition. I think Dr. Uliger was kind of alluding to, we try to have all of our staff be as culturally competent as possible, but depending on the definition, his analogy was kind of, but not everyone can be a cardiologist. You know, like we can all provide a level of medical care, vital signs, a general overview, and be competent to get the patient to the right level of care. I may be misspeaking for what he was saying, but it was, you know, not everyone can be a cardiologist. We can't expect everyone to be that level of expertise. But maybe offline, we look at the definition. I don't know if it's possible for me, since it's under the medical. Is it okay for me to bring up just another question around on page 6, during the intake and classification process? It's 3A, and it says, and in a private setting, is that the department versus like the medical staff, even though it's under medical?
What medical?
I think that's part of we're figuring out where that goes.
Okay,
Whether it
yeah,
belongs in
so I was just
801 or-
thinking, sometimes it's
You
difficult.
guys actually have more privacy than we do generally in terms of that sort of stuff.
And I just wanted to bring up, like, sometimes privacy, depending on the patient, is not really possible if someone's very psychotic or manic or in an acute agitated state, and it's just not possible for safety reasons. And I don't know if there are other qualifiers that it would allow it, but sometimes it's just not safe for anyone to do that. And we always try to respect privacy, but sometimes there are other issues going on. And it does say, like, in a private setting, and I wasn't sure that's always possible due to safety. Sometimes you have to have 2 guards in the room with you, or at the door.
Well, and where we balance that is we don't want to deny somebody access to care because they're not being safe. So sometimes you sacrifice privacy so you can give somebody care even though they're not being safe.
Correct.
And I know there's language in PRIA, and I believe what it says is as private a setting as possible. Because, and again, in PRIA, that language was there because when someone comes in on intake, you can't stand in the main area of intake and ask them, are you gay? Because you're now outing them to everyone in intake. At that point, if you have somebody in a segregation cell on intake because they've come in under the influence and that's where they need to be, you may have mental health meeting with them, and that's not private, because for them to be able to hear, you're talking quite loud. But that is as private as you can get, as safely allowable.
And that makes sense, like just maybe even changing it to as private as possible, or whatever the PRIA language is, matching the language.
Madam Chair.
Correct, yeah.
Dr. Richards, want to dig a little deeper into sort of we're not all cardiologists analogy, as it pertains to kind of the cultural competency we're asking for with regard to trans care. Certainly, despite the fact that you're not all cardiologists, you will have patients, incarcerated patients, who need a cardiologist. Similarly, we are going to have incarcerated trans identified folks who need trans-specific medical care. So that's what, yeah, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think just I know, apologies for sending the policy out. I wanted to make sure I dotted I's and crossed T's before I was releasing that. But I think what our approach, and with the department is really to try to instill that level of cultural competency for all staff. As I mentioned just briefly, and I know some people couldn't hear me well last time, that this week we're doing mandatory trainings for all healthcare staff. So even dental assistants, everyone is required to attend a gender affirming care hour-long training to set the stage for everyone. That it's around pronoun usage, it's around respect,
Right.
it's around. So that, I think we're embarking on that, combined with the policy. You know, if anyone wants gender affirming care, we direct them through to our committee and to the right people who have experience and expertise. So that we do have, I guess we do have a cardiologist, a WPATH mentor that's working with us. Yeah, sorry.
But similarly, right, despite the fact, or in addition to the fact, and I'm glad to hear that you're doing that sort of training, that's still a generalized training, right? That's still, we should use pronouns that have been indicated to be preferred. That's baseline. On top of that, there are going to be very specific physical and mental health needs for trans-identified people, and we should have specialists for those needs. That's what I want to make sure is in here.
Yes, and that's, I mean, we do have a special, so I think there's the general tier for everyone. We sent several members last year to a WPATH. It was a workshop. It was mental health professionals and one of the medical team, myself and Brianne Castle, the director. And then we have hired and have a contract with Dr. Brandy Brown, who has her own company in Maine, but I think it's Transform and Rise Up, and she's a doctorate of social work and is an expert, a certified WPATH, I think it's GEI 8 mentor. And we have just started working with her. So for example, someone, you know, I think we're strong on the basics. If someone comes in from the community, identifies as trans, we get their records, we continue hormones. We have a committee to address requests, surgical requests, whatever the requests are. We collaborate with the DOC, and we run that committee monthly. What we've done to take it to that level, I guess, of expertise is to work with Brandy Brown on more complicated cases. I mean, any case I've worked on in corrections, there tend to be like some of the more extreme cases that are complicated, but we are using her both as a consultant to meet with patients specifically to work on the treatment plan, because she has that level of expertise. We're also starting to utilize her for the team, and that we're starting at the women's facility to have them do case presentations to her and have her also teach them to be experts in the diagnosis of gender dysphoria, co-occurring diagnoses. So those are all sort of in the works and happening. And I really think that is the next step, and or sending more of our staff to certain trainings to get them that level of expertise if we need to do that. I mean, I think she's an excellent resource and certainly an expert.
So I guess to your point, any medical person should be able to identify somebody as potentially in cardiac arrest, having cardiac distress as a baseline. And if somebody needs a cardiologist, that expert level of care, we also should have access to that. And sort of the same thing regarding trans care. That would make sense to me.
So
Yeah.
then
Well, and I was just going to say the other thing we've done, I've been in contact with the Community Health Center. They're much easier to reach. Their gender affirming care experts, Dr. Natalie Antosh, is really responsive. Jacqueline Rose helped connect me with her, and so I can reach out to her. And we just kind of, we have a lot of patients we share in common, and so we try to be on the same page about our patient care and coordination of care.
So that leads me to page 6, lines 13 through 16. Now, this is within the medical care arena, where folks who consistently fail to use the proper pronouns, there would be verbal and written communication. Now, that's within the medical field, but we don't address this within the day-to-day operations of DOC with line staff.
So we do.
Yep.
I suspect this piece may
But
just
the
be in the
language-
wrong, I think it's in the wrong section. I think this is another piece.
Bill doesn't,
Agree.
now, when we took initial testimony for this, it was indicated that this is brought up at roll call.
It'd be on roll call. I mean, it's part of initial training at the academy. I was the chief of security when we first changed policy on this a decade ago, and it was conversations with staff, it was training, it was follow-up with staff. I mean, the biggest problem I had with staff was they were upset that they messed it up, and I would have staff on my desk, like, show up in my office, like, I said the wrong thing. Great, like, perfect, thank you and we'll work on that. But yeah, absolutely, if our policy folks are required to use the honorific and the pronoun specified, and if somebody were to consistently refuse to do that, they're in violation of policy. That's a potential disciplinary issue. We have a process for that, as we would for any other policy violation. But to your point, Chair, yeah, it's in the wrong section here.
Should be in both.
It should be in both, yes.
Should be in both. Shouldn't just be medical.
4 different trainings that I can think of at the academy to cover. And additionally, if a person did it repeated, and repeated in PRIA does not mean if I say it to MJ 10 times, it's repeated. If I say it to MJ and I say it to Kathy, that can be repeated. And so that would be defined as sexual harassment under PRIA. So we also have then a different set of requirements that we would have to follow for that. Because in the staff definition of sexual harassment, gender is included. In the incarcerated individual definition, it is not. Now, that does not mean that it's okay. It just means it's not then sexual harassment under PRIA. So what happens, and someone said this in testimony last time, and I didn't hug you because I can't. PRIA violation is not a real thing. I mean, the only people actually who can violate PRIA are people in this room. So we don't use terms, well, people do use those terms in the institutions, and we work very hard to have them stop using those terms. It's sexual abuse or sexual harassment. So oftentimes what happens is people think something's a PRIA violation, or they want to make it a PRIA violation because they think it has more weight. I understand why it feels that way, because there are certain requirements of timeframes, so we might handle things differently. But it doesn't have to be a PRIA violation for us to do something. So if we had an incarcerated individual intentionally misgendering someone, there's discipline for it and there's a process we would follow. If it was a staff person, and again, it would have to be repeated because that's a word that's used in PRIA, then it would then be considered sexual harassment under PRIA. And then while it's also misconduct, it would also be a violation of the federal PRIA standards.
And that, I mean, that would apply to sort of any other derogatory behavior toward an incarcerated individual. If I had a staff member who was calling folks pejorative names, that would be a policy and training violation, and they'd be subject to discipline.
And I know it was said in the last testimony, someone made a comment about someone's voice being deep. And so one of the things we have to be clear on is, and right before the last testimony, I had been in the hardware store dressed like I'm dressed, and I had my Irish cap on, and a gentleman said, why don't you take this person and I'll take this gentleman, referring to me. And then he did the, oh, I'm so sorry. And I was like, whatever, like I'm at the heart, like I don't care, And so we have to be clear around, again, we are a male-dominated world. People say things. We use the term, we say he all the time when we're talking about people. And we have to be clear about when is it discrimination and when is it just bad practice. And so while I can appreciate not wanting to hear something about my voice being deep, if a person if I'm a cisgender female with a deep voice and someone comments on my voice being deep, is that discrimination? No. So we might coach the person around, hey, when you're commenting on the depth of someone's voice, you may not know it, but you are ascribing certain expectations you may not want to put in there. So just be mindful that language is going to maybe have you not have friends. But it's not necessarily discrimination. And so being really clear about those things, because it doesn't have to be discrimination to be bad or bad practice. And we're going to address those things no matter, what, as best as we can. We got a lot of different opinions in there. And
Yes,
so
we do.
we'll do our best to respond.
So anything else?
I feel like that was enough, Madam
Yeah.
Chair.
Yeah.
I feel
So
like we covered it.
Everybody's got a lot of work.
Actually, I'd like to offer a moment of appreciation for the Josh Jen dynamic.
Yeah.
You,
Well, they're gonna
you,
keep
you,
doing
you
it.
finish each other's thoughts. You sometimes argue, but it's very compelling testimony. And I don't feel like we're getting spun at all. It feels like a good partnership. So just want to say that.
He managed
Thank
it
you.
well.
Well, but I mean, we're both on committees together and we are going to disagree. We should. That's the point of having a multidisciplinary committee, is to have different points of view and perspective. And Jen comes from, one perspective. That's both her role and her experience. And I come from a different one. And that's why we work together, and why we work together well, is to balance some of those things. And we've been working together for a minute.
A minute.
It feels like you bring a lot of compassion to the work. I want to say so. That's appreciated.
So I've got two things. One, well, I got more than two things, but we've got to have another draft of this. But before we get there, I would like to have your directives in terms of this issue sent to us. I think it's really important for committee members to read this. This comes from headquarters of WellPath in terms of how they deal with the transgender population in the medical field, which I think is important for folks to read this, to understand this. And then to go forward with new language and to help Hillary, I'd like 3 members of the committee to sit down with Hillary along with you folks from DOC. I would like Gina, Brian, and Troy to sit down and go through the changes that we've talked about here and really look at the language of the whole bill, because we haven't read much, and I wouldn't worry about the intent language of this. It's the statute changes to really get this in a good form. So that could happen.
I might suggest in terms of process, there have been enough suggested changes this morning that I think preparing a new draft for that group of 3 to discuss might be.
Well, there's more that you missed.
I am glad to know that is the case. I think just my suggestion is that I prepare an amendment that covers what
What
we
we
discussed
talked
this morning.
Right.
And that will be the most useful thing for the group of 3 to review, and then we have other issues, but I think that might be a efficient way to move forward.
And I would just flag for the committee in terms of the WellPath policy, and we enjoy working with WellPath. Dr. Richard, don't take this wrong. We change medical contractors
Right.
periodically. So, well, that is certainly the policy of our current medical contractor. Historically, we're on like the 7th or 8th that I recall. So those do change. We have to put that out for RFP periodically. So that is relevant now, but not
So
always.
one of the big changes we did, Hillary, was at the very beginning, which you missed, which
But
was
it's all on YouTube.
it's all on YouTube, which deals with the search, and the person is being searched on page 3, B and C. That needs to be broken out in terms of what happens at booking.
Yep.
And then what happens after they're detained. So that has to be really addressed.
And just confirming that as I'm working with the group of 3 on the draft language, we can touch base with folks here.
Well, they should, DOC should be part of that group.
Okay, great. Just
Should be 5 of you working with Hillary for that. The other thing I want to broach,
I do.
the other thing I want to broach is there's interest in codifying PREA here in Vermont. And I haven't looked at this. I got an email from Haley, I don't know, it was late last night or this morning, about some possible statute that we could do. It's based on Connecticut. I quickly opened it up this morning and I said, well, I'm going to wait until we get in the committee. But if people are interested in codifying PREA, which might be a really smart move, we should also include that in the next draft, if possible.
I actually had an intern just researching the different states. I think 5 states are working on it or have done it. So he was just going to compile something. Maybe we could send to you, Hillary, to take a look at that. Because I think if you codified PREA in its entirety, it would be voluminous, right?
No, we don't want
Yeah.
to codify.
I was going to say, the ability to include it in a timely next draft depends on what we're saying in codifying PREA.
So since PREA is in my title, I have some care. And I had some, after the conversation, I was thrilled with the interest and also leery, because how do you do that and have it be manageable and achievable? And what you got sent was Connecticut's proposed bill. I did not read it with a fine tooth comb, but I read it, and the opening statement, I was like, oh, well, that's how. So basically what they wrote is, we're gonna follow PREA and these things that it requires. So if PREA changes, all of the main subjects are in there, and it's all of the, essentially what I call the special interest topics, right? That you will consider how you house transgender people, that you will respond to sexual abuse. So what it does is it identifies the what and not the how. Because what cannot happen, and you see this if you read PREA, PREA doesn't tell you the how. That's what the standards did. When PREA was passed in 2003, we didn't get standards and measures until 2014, because it took that long for a ton of people to get them together. So I'm not saying this is the one that like is the best of all, because I haven't read others, but it was a great idea of, oh, okay, I see how you went about it. Where it just basically says, we agree that these things that PREA identified are important too.
Kind of codify the standards in the statute, I think would be
Yes.
both difficult and time consuming, but overly restrictive and prescriptive in a way that would be problematic.
So I just forwarded to the committee in an email what Haley sent last evening, it was yesterday, so it was during the evening, the proposed bill in Connecticut. And I just sent that to Hillary as well. So that could be a good starting point for folks, possibly.
And Jen definitely gets the hot seat for that. I don't even have to be here.
But you can talk with Hillary, you five, to see how we can incorporate it possibly in the next draft.
And in case it needs to be said, the department has no intent on changing anything. And again, nothing has changed as far as the standards are concerned. They're still there. And so as far as if there's any concern that, you know, all of a sudden we're like, we're good, that's not the agency's direction. It's not the department's direction. We are still committed to ensuring that folks are safe from sexual.
A couple of us were talking the other day, who started before PREA was law. And the change in culture, Vermont, maybe not as much as some states, but corrections culture changed with PREA, and that was a good, positive, important, overdue change.
When did PREA come in? Late night?
The law, no, the law itself was 2003.
George W. Bush signed it.
And then the statute, the standards didn't come out till some years later, but the law itself was 2003. So anybody
We were dealing with it in the late 90s.
Oh.
We had legislation, we were
commission-
dealing with sexual assault,
Yeah.
with
The commission.
power structure
Yeah.
of facilities, there is no consent. We were dealing with that in the late 90s in this committee. So that was pre-PREA.
that was pre-PREA, yeah.
Well, and that's what drove PREA. I mean, that's what the
Yep.
Prison Rapes Commission and the testimony came from advocate communities, because folks were getting released from institutions and talking about the sexual violence that they encountered. And then those
Mhm.
advocacy groups, AA and religious communities, are the ones that brought it forward to DC, saying this is a problem.
Problem.
And then the corrections administrator said, hey, wait a second, we agree, we just didn't know what to do. Now that you're saying you also agree it's important, you want to be at the table. And so they're like, I don't know all the states, but as many states as I can think of, all were participating in the drafting of the standards and working on that final rule to make sure that it worked, just like we did today, so that it was achievable. So
So-
we agree.
Anything else before we take a break here? So we've been in quite a while. So Gina and Brian and Troy and Josh and Jen, figure out when we can sit down with Hillary. Will we schedule? And
Maybe early mid next.
oh, we're away.
Especially if we are adding PREA, it will not be Friday. But can touch. base.
Well, if you, I think you're scheduled for Friday. Right? Are you scheduled? I've got to look. Let's
Don't believe I'm scheduled to be here on Friday.
Right. I'm just wondering, even if we could get. No, you're not. Yes, you're, I don't know. even a preliminary draft that does not include Priya, would that be possible? Right before the end
Not
of
by
the
Friday
week?
morning.
Hmm?
Okay, not by Friday morning.
Not by Friday morning, and not by Thursday? Because it's Wednesday.
Yeah, don't do it by Friday, but if you can do it by Thursday, that'd be great.
Well, maybe you could, maybe there might be time to sit down with Hillary prior to our town meeting break. I'm not sure if there would be or not. If you could sit down with Hillary and go through some of the changes, would that work? For your
It's-
schedule?
If the group of three is available, it's on Friday afternoon. Your schedule is.
Well, we're
I
not
can
working.
be
We
available.
have something Friday afternoon at about 12 that won't last more than a half an hour, 45 minutes. So I'd leave it, it'd be great
And that's
if,
something unedited for us to discuss at that point.
right. It would be great if, because if we get this bill out, we only have the week we have coming back from town meeting. So it'd be great if the three of you and the two folks could meet Friday afternoon with Hillary just to go through that rough draft. So that at least we have something put together when we come back the week after. I was gonna say the week after Thanksgiving, a week after town meeting.
A draft of the Priya edition or.
Oh, okay,
I
yeah.
would work on it next week,
Yeah.
maybe on Monday, and I think. Depending on how much
Again, let's,
work that will take, but we need to make a decision about what's feasible. But that timing. That works for folks.
yeah.
Well, I'll let you five figure it out with Hillary for when you want to meet on Friday. Okay? So I'm just trying to move this along, because when we come back, the week we come back after town meeting, we got to get the bills out. And we got some work ahead of us. I'm trying to get as much in place as we can this week. So we don't have to work late nights. We come back, as we might make crossover. So, anything else before we take a break? Shift gears.
We appreciate being at the table and able to offer input as you guys are working on these issues. It's important to us as well, but the specifics matter.
We appreciate you being here, being willing to work through this, because I know sometimes this topic can be really uncomfortable for folks. And it's a real learning experience also for many. We appreciate the dignity that you bring to the conversation. I appreciate that. Anything else before we go off of YouTube? So go off YouTube, let's take a 5-minute break and come back and we'll be